Revolutionary salutations to the people of Zimbabwe. Comrades, salutations. Welcome to yet another episode of Tête, hashtag shaping politics. Comrades, it has been long, but today we saw it fit, and I'm joined by none other than Comrade Gift Ostalos Ziba, a revolutionary intellectual who is on the platform today as an intellectual. Forget his political jacket, he's on the platform today as a revolutionary intellectual. Comrade Ostalos, welcome to the show and greet the people of Zimbabwe and the entire cosmos.
Thank you very much, Brother Mlambo. Convivial salutations to the people of Zimbabwe. Thank you for having us. Thank you for listening to the show.
Thank you so much. So, fellow Zimbabweans, fellow Africans, fellow world citizens, today's show is going to focus primarily, Comrade Ostalos, on three things. There have been a lot of movements in the economy, a lot of movements in the political, a lot of movement in the social. So we're going to touch on the politics of the country. We're going to touch on the economics of the country. We're also going to touch on narratives that are being peddled by false intellectuals, by our historical people. So, Comrade Ostalos, to get straight into the show, let us talk on the state of the politics. We saw the emergence of the new in January 2022. Can you give us a brief synopsis of what the new stands for going forward?
Thank you very much, Brother Mlambo. As you know, that is the Zimbabwean party politic, as was dominated historically by the Movement for Democratic Change and ZANU PF, introduced and sustained the politics of toxicity, a politics of big names, a politics of deficiency in terms of ideas, and of course the attack and assault on the alternative by the regime in Salisbury. It became inevitable for the alternative, as led by President Advocate Nelson Chamisa as the champion-in-chief in the alternative, to create a new citizens-driven political organization. This is a movement, Brother Mlam. It's not a political party.
Okay.
Because political party, fellow Zimbabweans, are narrow. Political parties are driven by the agenda for primitive accumulation of power for the purpose of achievement by political elites. But the Citizens Coalition for Change is a new philosophy, it's a new movement, a new ideological threat, whose intention and objective is to transform the concrete lives of the suffering masses of our people.
No, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Comrade Ostalos, thank you so much. So you have put citizens at the center,
yes,
as the alternative. You are saying you want to chlorinate the politics of Zimbabwe.
Precisely.
You need to cleanse the politics of Zimbabwe. If we were in church, a Pentecostal church, you are saying you're going to exorcise the demons of toxicity and division.
Precisely.
But Comrade Ostalos, we had by-elections in March, and we saw the performance of the new. The performance of the yellow movement that you are a part of.
Yes.
But as an intellectual, I want you to give us a brief analysis of the by-elections. What is your assessment? 19 out of 28 possible parliamentary seats, 75 out of a possible 100 local government seats. What do you think is the
I think that the by-election represented the conscience of the moment.
Okay.
The people of Zimbabwe wanted to send an emphatic and strong message to the regime in South, because remember, this is a side meal. It's a microcosm of the macrocosm.
Oh, yes.
It reflects a possible parliamentary majority for the alternative come 2023, because we seek the majority of the by-election seats that were contesting both in parliament and in local government.
Yes.
So for me, it's also an introduction which the new is carrying, that we are moving, we are transforming from slogans to propositions, from positions to propositions. Wherein, if you see the new crop of leaders, yes, they were part and parcel of the 16th, 17th parliament, but they are coming into the Augusta House now with propositions. They are also coming with the alternative in parliament to make sure that we hold the executive to account. But that is the primary role of members of parliament, to make sure that they hold the executive to account.
In line with section 199 of the Constitution.
Institutions.
Thank you. No, Comrade Ostalos, we'll come to the issue of institutions. Don't worry. We are here. We relax. We are coming to the issue of institutions. But Comrade Ostalos, I want you to tell us about what you think is the level of political consciousness among Zimbabweans. Because how I can't fathom the idea that a party less than 4 months old can get into a by-election, and out of a possible 28 parliamentary seats, it gets 19. Where in the world has that ever happened? What is the uniqueness of Zimbabweans that they can choose, notwithstanding the challenges, notwithstanding the repression, notwithstanding even the banning of your organization's political rallies, not even withstanding state-sanctioned and state-sponsored brutality and violence in places like Gokwe, in places like Kwekwe? What is it that you want to say to the people of Zimbabwe regarding their political culture and their levels of political consciousness?
I think Zimbabweans are very clear that they understand. It's a confirmation, Brother Mlambo, in what philosophers what Socrates, what Plato, what Antonio Gramsci will call a social contract. But the social contract, Brother Mlam, is what drives society, is what drives the political program. So a social contract is a relationship between those who govern and those who are being governed. But more precisely, and an emerging philosophy which affirms Zimbabwe with part and parcel of global movements is that at a certain historic moment, society, politics and nature chooses a certain person to lead and charge the struggle for transformation for that particular generation. As it was for Martin Luther King, as it was for Thomas Sankara, as it was for
Patrice Lumumba,
exactly, my brother, as it was for
Julius Kambarage Nyerere.
History has chosen Advocate Nelson Chamisa.
Also, you have touched on a very important component. The conscience of the moment.
Yes.
So you are saying the nature of Zimbabweans' political thinking and philosophy is that at a particular historic moment, like Joshua Nkomo in the 1960s,
precisely the
like Dabaningi Stole in 1963, like Morgan Tsvangirai in 1999 at the National Working People's Convention, the people of Zimbabwe, realizing the conscience of the moment, located a man from Gutu, located a man from Chiwara village, whom we now call Digo. Comrade Osalas, I want to talk about the alternative. The political institutions that we have currently in this country save toxicity, save primitive accumulation, save exploitation, save primitive accumulation by elites. What is the alternative political system that the new is proposing before we go into the economy and later on into the social?
Thank you very much. The Citizens Coalition for Change, in its philosophy and ideological trust, we want to create a democratic developmental state anchored on a socially just economy. Why is this important, Brother Mlam? For the past 4 decades, we have failed to successfully connect with the ethos and agenda of the liberation struggle.
True.
Every center of the liberation project was the sacrosanctity and the importance of the vote. Every center of the liberation struggle was land and the economy. We have failed to achieve these 2 fundamental central objectives of the liberation project. So a democratic developmental state will be able to make sure that, one, we create strong institutions. We've got a litany of challenges with the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission. We've got challenges with the Zimbabwe's political system. There is no separation of powers. Parliament has been rendered defunct. The executive has created what we call executive tyranny. It's dominance over the other 2 arms of government,
judiciary and parliament,
the judiciary and the legislature. So we must make sure that we create a democratic developmental state. So where politics is not just driven by slogans, but is driven by ideas, by issues. We move from individuals to institutions. We move from slogans to propositions.
From slogans to propositions. Hold it there, Comrade Osalos. You talked about something that is very pertinent. So if I'm getting you correctly, the ideological persuasion, the ideological standing. Because the alternative that you're a part of has been accused of being ideologically inept, has been accused of being ideologically bereft of any ideological compass or clarity. But here you are telling us clearly that you subscribe to the philosophy of a democratic developmental state. Because there are others, Comrade Osalos, who want to argue that we don't need democracy, but rather we need development. We don't need democracy, but rather we need a strong man who delivers on economic prosperity, on economic transformation and economic growth. But if genuinely a strong man would lead to economic transformation and change, Robert Mugabe was a strong man. Surely Zimbabwe's economic forces would have been transformed. So the case for a strong man developmental state has lost its merits, if I'm to quote you correctly. But I want you to touch on the characteristics of what you're calling a democratic developmental state. What are its core features? Because we want to take this opportunity to educate the masses of our people, so that even the members of your organization or your movement, as you called it, can begin to articulate what are its features.
Thank you, Brother Mlam. One of the most important features that we want to introduce in the policy of this country is cadreship development, which basically talks about the values of a democratic developmental state. These values include solidarity. These values include freedom. These values include justice. Why are these values important, Brother Mlam? What you see in the current present political system is that they've actually regulated, they've actually removed from the political environment the element of values. So what happens when one enters the political system without values, without a moral and ideological compass? they join extraction, they join primitive accumulation of wealth. So if you see, we have actually development without transformation. So people's lives have not been changed because we have men and women who are living without a political conscience. Thomas Sankara, who informs part of ideological disposition, says, Brother Mlam, a soldier without ideological orientation
is a potential criminal. Yes.
So if you look at, for example, for people like Mtuli Nyube, there are people who are bureaucrats who are introducing the political system but without an ideological compass, so they can easily extract the economy for the benefit of the minority, not for the men. Because our philosophy is that let's go for the men and not for the few.
Yes.
So this informs every cadre, every bureaucrat. Look at all progressive society. America has got the American dream. What is it that binds Zimbabwean citizens together? What is the vision? What is the national vision? So what we are doing now, we are in the process of galvanizing and consulting with the three motive forces that are going to form the victorious forces in 2023, so that we gather and collectively agree what is the national question. Once we have the national question, we agree what is the vision that Zimbabwe wants to see. How do we connect to the ethos of the liberation struggle and create a society that is able to transform the country lives of the suffering masses of our people?
No, thank you so much, Comrade Dosalos. Fellow citizens, fellow world citizens, a democratic developmental state, if I am to quote him clearly,
precisely,
that they aspire to create in this country has got three or so features. Number one, autonomy. Number two is embeddedness within society.
Precisely.
Number three, consensus.
Precisely.
So because the democratic developmental state will be autonomous from the influence of capitalists, from the influence of different social actors, it will be strong enough to create state institutions that you referred to. Institutions that are already found in our constitution, chapter 12 institutions that are supposed to support democracy. The idea is to make them more robust and independent. If I'm to quote you, that's what you have actually explained to us. What is it that the democratic developmental state will do in terms of consensus building? You refer to galvanizing citizens and engaging them. This is in line with section 13, Comrade Dosalos, of the Constitution of Zimbabwe, which states that before developmental policies are done by the state, they should involve the people of Zimbabwe in terms of consultation. Comrade Dosalos, thank you so much for touching on the political. This marks the end of the first segment of our show, but we go straight into the second segment, and we are now focusing on the economy. And on the economy, I'll just give a brief preamble, if you allow me, Comrade Dosalos, a brief synopsis, fellow citizens, of the state of the economy. The International Monetary Fund, based in Bretton Woods, released a very worrying report that Zimbabwe's economy grew by 6.3%. I wonder where the IMF is getting the sense that the economy grew, because if you look at the qualitative aspects of the growth they are talking about, the purchasing power of the people has been eroded by inflation. The parallel market rate is going up. Actually, today it's around 320, 350. I don't know what the IMF is talking about when it says the economy is growing, when the aggregate demand in the economy is so limited, when inequality, Comrade Dosalos, is at its very peakest, it is very peak in the history of this country. Never has there been a time in the history of this country called Zimbabwe since 1980 when the rich have accumulated so much wealth while the poor have become poorer and poorer. Number three, there's never been creation of decent jobs. So where is the IMF, Comrade Dosalos, getting the idea that the economy is growing when the economy is not producing decent formal jobs, when the state, which has the primary responsibility of creating jobs in the public sector, jobs that are secure, jobs that are decent, is failing to create jobs. In the private sector, we can't even talk about the private sector in Zimbabwe. It's close to nothing. There are no jobs that are being created. When you look at the healthcare system of this country, the deterioration in the amounts of wages or money that is paid to medical professionals, not even talking about the state of infrastructure in this country. So we wonder, we question the efficacy, the sincerity, the genuineness of the IMF. But it is this very same IMF which has been notorious globally for financing and supporting dictatorships. It is this same IMF which has been notorious for influencing the structural adjustment programs on the global north, i.e. in the late 1990s by Bernard Chidzero in this country. And in 2018, ISAP 2.0 by Mutuli Ncube under the guise of austerity for prosperity. So this is the state of the economy. It's not producing jobs. There are a lot of illicit financial flows. When you look at the mining sector, $100 million being lost monthly. So I want you to touch on the alternative. These are the challenges. What would the alternative democratic developmental state bring in terms of the economic turnaround program that you are proffering?
Thank you very much, Brother. That's a very important discourse. The economy. The first thing, Brother Mlam, you saw that Mtuli introduced John Mangushka $100 note.
RTGS.
For us, it's a sign. is a signal to the people of Zimbabwe and all progressive regional and international leaders that Zimbabwe has now entered de jure, because it was de facto. It has now entered de jure the phase of uncertainty. We have now entered in our economy the era of uncertainty, because the RBZ continues with quasi-fiscal activities. The RBZ has been at the center, as led by John Manguchka and Mtuli Ngube, have actually been practicing neoliberal extremism. We have this challenge that we talked about when we were talking about the political, that the ideology is important in driving the economy. You cannot run an economy without an ideological compass. So what we see in the current Ministry of Finance is right-wing extremism. What we see is extraction, is primitive accumulation of votes for benefit of the minority, not for the men. And what we see at the present moment, Brother Mlambo, in the economy, is that the state has relegated the role of other institutions to make sure that RBZ is regulated. So this is the part of the plethora of
challenge.
Problems
Yes.
that we are facing. Also what you have highlighted. What is the method? What is the proposal? When we enter into government, come 2023,
Yes.
there are steps that we must do. Our economic recovery plan will include, but not limited to, the following.
Yes.
Number one, Brother Mlam, we must make sure that we abandon the Zimbabwean dollar.
Okay.
The Zimbabwean dollar was caught in flagrante delicto. It's like a wife or a husband that is caught pens down.
Yes.
Trust has collapsed. The people of Zimbabwe don't trust the Zimbabwean dollar, including those in government. And the problem with that, it is speaking and fueling corruption. If you look at the current problem of the auction system that we have, it's actually taking almost 2 billion every year to make sure that we support that auction system. RBZ is doing that without parliamentary approval.
Yes.
That debt is going to be inherited
By us.
Zimbabwe.
Yes.
Taxpayers are going to pay that man. But how much is the auction system able to support the people of Zimbabwe? It's only supporting 24% of the demand. So what it means, that is not working. What we must do when we get into government is to just abandon the auction system by abandoning the Zimbabwean dollar. And we save 2 billion every year. So we must abandon the Zimbabwean dollar and reintroduce
the multi-currency system.
Currency basket, so that the US dollar, the rand,
The
and
puller,
in some cases,
yeah.
the puller are currencies of exchange in the formal market. Number two, Brother Mlambo, we propose the creation of $100 billion economy to us is very important, because it deals with a number of problems that we are facing. Number one, we make sure that we finance the important driving factors of the economy, like mining,
tourism,
support tourism,
agriculture. Yes.
Those are critical backbones of the economy. That not this kind of command agriculture.
Or Fumbudza.
We introduced when we were in our previous movement, the element of smart agriculture. We're going to talk about it later in the segment. It's important because we must make sure that we, right now, what we are seeing, the land is a problem in this country. Mutuli Ngube and Emerson Mnangagwa in the current government, they're actually reversing. They have said in their own official statements, let's go back to the Lancaster resolution on land, which was not sufficient for 2 decades to address the land question. So we must make sure that we give title to this to farmers. We come up with a robust government program to support farmers, regardless of their race, tribe, culture, and background. Let's give people so that they work the land. Let's make sure that in mining we deal with the leakages. How much money do we lose?
100 million a month in gold alone.
Russia is currently free, but she was caught in flagrante delicto with gold.
Yes.
But she's hosting parties and banquets in this country.
Yeah.
So we must make sure that again we create strong institutions as a third element of our economic plan. Let's make sure that we empower parliament, because we must deal with quasi-fiscal activities happening at the central bank.
And at the Ministry of
Once
Finance
at the Ministry of
itself.
Finance,
Yeah.
every debt that is assumed must be subject to parliamentary approval.
Yes.
Let's not allow executive tyranny. But the economy is shrinking because of executive extractive political, economic, legal order. So let's deal with that. Once we create strong institutions, Brother Mlam, we're able to deal with corruption. You saw the report by the Auditor General.
300 million was lost.
Exposing how much the elites, how much even those who are given the mandate in the Anti-Corruption Commission are corrupt themselves.
Yes.
So who police the police?
Who
So
police the
let's create
police?
strong institutions.
Who police the
Let's make sure
police?
that,
Let's create
strong
strong institutions. In the first segment, you talk about strong political institutions. In the second segment, you made reference to strong economic institutions. And I want to talk about state-owned enterprises in a democratic developmental state. The role that state-owned enterprises will play in terms of, number one, job creation, and number two, the economic development, or what we call growth rates that are above 10% annually. Because the democratic developmental state is also ambitious to make sure that economic growth rates are high as 10% per annum. It's practical if we address the fundamentals around the macroeconomics of this country, if we address the issues around illicit financial flows, illicit mineral outflows, if we also address the big elephant in the room, which is corruption, which is characterizing our country, is exposed obviously by the Office of the Auditor General. I want you to talk about the importance of state-owned enterprises as employment creating institutions, but that are publicly owned, but that they compete at the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange or even in other international stock exchanges in the world. But primarily the role that state-owned enterprises will play in creating jobs for the young people, as well as the role that the private sector, because the democratic developmental state won't actually say, no, the private sector is not needed. No, the private sector will be needed, but the state will play a critical and leading role in economic management in planning.
Thank you, Brother Mlamba. The reason why I want to create strong institutions
is
because we want the state to be the driver of the economy.
Okay.
The private sector is important, but let the economy, let jobs creation in the present system. The government has relegated its role to the private sector and non-governmental organizations.
Yes.
But ironically, the same government bans the existence of non-governmental organizations
through the PVO bill.
Tries to regulate them. While it's in the same process,
it's failing.
To give the mandate of employment, to give the mandate of jobs creation to the private sector. That cannot be. Let the economy be driven by the state. Let's create state-driven institutions. For example, let's empower dairy board. Let's make sure that all the state institutions, let's go back to cold storage commission.
Yes.
Let's create huge state institutions that are able to create labor, but that also provide the
your NRA set of this world.
Let's go back to the provision of public transport, which is efficient, that is able to compete with the private sector.
Exactly.
Let's make sure that we deal with the question of import substitution.
That's true.
Let's empower the local industry. Let's go to the fourth industrial revolution. The current problem of the economy in this country in terms of institutions, we don't have bureaucrats. Bureaucrats have been replaced by politicians because the employment process is driven by patronage and not by merit. So let's bring people who are competent. They are there. Zimbabweans are all over this, so let's bring them back to build our country. Let's have state institutions that are strong, but that are able to compete with the private sector. Once we do that, Brother, we know that every ordinary Zimbabwean is going to afford.
Yes.
So the question is about making sure that basic needs are affordable. Water, electricity. Once we do that, Brother let's transform our electricity cables. If you go to government building at the present day, you want to start a business, they are in the analog generation. They are papers. What happens if that
the ease of doing business?
Let's deal with the ease of doing business. Let's go digital
to attract domestic investment.
Oh
yes. Oh yes. Oh yes. Oh yes.
President Chamisa has talked about artificial intelligence
and e-governance.
That is the level of what we want to do.
Yes.
President Chamisa assumes.
No, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Comrade Salos. Fellow Africans, fellow Zimbabweans, the alternative economic program is centered around the important role that the state will play in economic development.
Yes.
The state will never play a relegated role as just watching and creating what neoliberals call a good environment for business, a good investment climate. Comrade Salos, there are issues to do with tax exemptions, and I'm very emotional when it comes to tax exemptions. I want you to tell us, as the alternative government, when you get in, what will be your policy regarding tax exemptions that are given to multinational corporations / transnational corporations that are not going to stay in Zimbabwe for long? What is your opinion on tax exemptions? What will your government do as a government that believes in the use of tax revenue to finance development, to finance social service delivery, to finance the gender needs of women and girls, to make sure that education is free, to make sure that primary health care is free, to make sure that there are roads, to make sure that there is a decent public transportation system and infrastructural development in this country? What will your government do in terms of tax breaks and tax exemptions?
Thank you, Brother Mlam. That's a social program. We are very precise because what we don't want is to create growth, what we call ruthless growth.
Yes.
We don't want ruthless economic growth.
Yes.
Where economic indicators say the economy is growing, but the ordinary average Zimbabwean is suffering. So we've got a conscious, we've got a clear social program that is going to be anchored on one, funding health in this country. Zimbabwe is a signatory to the Abuja Declaration.
Yes.
That says 14% of the budget must
15%.
15% of
Yeah.
the budget must go to health. So we must make sure that we don't just ratify and not practice. So what we want to move from is from theory to practice in our social service provision. So we want to make sure that, number one, we make sure that we allocate 15% of the budget to health. Let's make sure that education from primary up to high school is funded for free by the state.
Yes.
How do you make sure that, let's deal with the question of taxation.
Exactly.
Let's have royalties given to the state.
Yes.
When the state is able to account to citizens, when the state has earned the trust from ordinary people, let transnational companies, let those who are investing like Huawei, let those who are investing like Great Dyke, pay royalties. Let's deal
At least 15% of mining royalties to finance.
Mining royalties, 15% of mining royalties. What will happen is that ordinary citizens are going to get
free education.
in
Cancer machines are going to
we
be
are going
there.
to make sure that we resolve the immediate crisis that we are seeing. This country has no cancer machines as it and
Doesn't have proven.
If you go to Parenyat, you can spend time without treatment. So let's make sure that we finance this. Let's give doctors, let's give workers a salary above the poverty data line.
Oh, yes.
Let's give our men and women in the military.
Yes.
Let's give the patriotic citizens serving in the police force in this country
Yes.
a salary above poverty data line. Let's restore the dignity of the ordinary people by making sure that we give a legitimate and proper tax that goes to the state from mining royalties and finance the social service that we're talking about. Because when you talk about these things, we are not imagining. It's a program. It's a clear economic program that sees to the social agenda of transformation.
Thank you so much, Comrade Sellers.
People are going to live.
Thank you so much.
That
Your
is
tax
better.
policy is now clear. So what basically you are saying is that there is going to be reform of the country's tax code, the country's tax policies, to make sure that the state has the ability
The 2% tax
must be scraped off, for
yes,
example.
without doubt.
You know, these funny taxes that we are paying, 2% tax,
Don't overtax the ordinary
don't
people.
burden
Don't burden
the
the
citizens
ordinary people.
with the taxation. So thank you so much. So someone might be asking, how then do we finance free education? You answered that. How do we finance free healthcare? You answered that. The revenue that comes from taxation will finance our social services and social and human needs. Comrade Osalos, there has been the creation, we are now going into the third segment of the show.
Thank you,
there has been the creation of funny narratives by funny people who are anti-intellectual, who are anti-truth, who are claiming that the youth are not ready to govern this country, who are proposing that there is no alternative to ZANU PF. Their arguments are like those of Francis Fukuyama, who in 1989, during the fall of the Berlin Wall, said that we have reached the end of history because communism has failed. But evidence has shown that liberal democracy has not endured enough. We are seeing the contestations in places like Ukraine, in places like Russia. So I want you to touch on the narratives that are being peddled by people who own media houses, by people who claim that it is not yet time for the youth to lead. He is arguing that we are not yet ripe to lead. Are we focusing on the person now? Are we focusing on Advocate Chamisa as a person, or what he represents, as you said earlier on, as the conscience of the moment, and the program of action that you have so meticulously articulated on a democratic developmental state? Can we then say the youth are not ready to lead, Comrade Osalos?
I think you are talking about submissions.
Submissions by some business
Trevor.
by some business mogul by the name Trevor.
Okay, I know. Of course, brother, you know that we really would want to engage with persons and individuals, but that's not the kind of society that we want to create. We want people to engage ideas.
Yes.
The society that we want to create is based on issues
Yes.
and ideas to transform
Yes.
our society. Look, I'll respond because you've asked the question.
Yes.
I didn't see that one coming.
Yes.
Trevor Ngube, I'll state even facts. I think that Trevor Ngube submits his personal views, personal views which don't reflect the views of the majority of any section of society, be it the black middle class, be it the
workers,
people, be it working class, be it even the political elite in this country. But I think that his views are wrong. He's not just wrong as in today. He's wrong as he was wrong by his views that Mnangagwa must be given a chance.
Okay.
He is wrong as he was wrong by that President Chamisa is going to give an offer
which he wouldn't refuse.
Yes. He's wrong as he was wrong by that Simba Makoni would make the president of this country. He's wrong as he was wrong.
That Ngosana Moyo.
That Ngosana Moyo is the best political leader to take this country forward.
Oh yes.
He's wrong as he was wrong about joining the advisory committee of the new dispensation.
The park.
He's wrong as he was wrong that the Zimbabwean dollar, brother Mlam, is the best, not the US dollar. I saw him yesterday visiting the
American embassy in Blufffield.
I was wrong. As he's wrong today about these submissions about
Advocate Chamisa.
Chamisa. Look, Chamisa does not represent himself. And I can tell you, Trevor Nube can engage. With you can't make a judgment of someone. We have not, I think he's got a show.
What he calls the conversation.
Invite the president, engage him. Because the personal hatred for a person cannot translate to the lack of ideas, programs, vision, and strategy in an institution. Because this is the institution. Let me give you, brother, I've given you the litany, chronological,
of Trevor Nguye's aberrations.
That you can make qualitatively and quantitatively my submissions to make a judgment.
Yes.
Whether he's right or wrong about these submissions.
Yes.
Yes, I've given you the litany, chronological of his wrong political judgments. But let me go, brother, now.
Yes.
For the purpose of the people of Zimbabwe,
yes,
they are not vulnerable to the people who are historical.
Yes.
People who give half-baked intellectual submissions to the political market in this country. We went to school.
Yes.
And part of our job as organic intellectual thought leaders,
as products of the society of modern scientific thought.
By these people.
Yes.
Trevor Nube, brother Mlam.
Yes.
Besides even inviting President Chamisa, like he has done with any other leader in society, you would have said, what is the history of the man? This is the man who was the youngest serving cabinet minister under Robert Mugabe. This is the man that his own newspaper conducting public voting process of the best minister was given an award 2 times. And the best minister of ICT. We are actually sitting in this days, brother, a beneficiary of the progressive policies.
Yeah.
Because when we want to talk about issues,
yeah,
what are the policies that President Chamisa introduced as the Minister of Finance? This is what we are benefiting from. The internet is accessible to everyone.
Everyone has a cell phone.
Everyone has a cell phone. Everyone has got an access to startup packs, which were expensive in equivalent to
12 million Zimbabweans are on WhatsApp.
When high school, internet penetration in this country, WhatsApp penetration are statistics, data, numbers that reflect the progress in the Ministry of ICT. But not only that, we want to talk about the people, brother now, who are in the alternative.
Who surround the advocate.
What was the success of the government for national unity? Was it not because of the contribution of Professor Washman?
When he was Minister of Industry?
Contribution of Comrade Wanachi Tendai.
When he was Minister of Finance?
Was it not the contribution of people like Mangom? Was it not the contribution of the people who are in the alternative? Running the government. Mugabe found sleep. Mugabe, even in his own admission, could tell that these are the best people.
He characterized Nelson Chamisa as a supersonic minister. Can you wrap up your submission? Yes.
Can
Yes.
you say there is deficiency?
No.
If you look at people like ourselves,
we are products
of the alternative.
Yes.
Born and bred from organic struggles.
In Chabalala.
Intellectual discourses.
Yes.
Can we say, Brother Mlam, can we conclude that there is deficiency of ideas?
No.
As I conclude, Brother Mlam,
oh yes,
we introduced in our previous movement,
yes,
smart cities, smart agriculture. What did the government do? Have we not been the provision of ideas in this government? The only problem is that they can't implement the ideas that we've said. We talked about smart roads. We talked about bullet trains. We talked about
spaghetti roads. Yeah.
Spaghetti roads. They said it's a dream, but that's what they're talking about now.
Yeah.
That's what they are trying to do. Smart cities. That's what Julimo is trying to do in council. They can't implement what they don't have the capacity. They can't implement what they don't have the ideological and moral compass. They don't have the commitment. They are not authentic. They are not genuine, the men and women in ZANU PF. But they accept, they acknowledge. Trevor Nube is not engaged, Brother Blam. The content of our submission.
He has engaged a persona, not the content.
The person is outside, Brother Blam.
Yes.
He's leading a generation.
Yes.
He is like any other history leader that has been created to lead a particular historic struggle. What is President Chamisa leading? He's leading the transformation struggle. He's leading a generation whose time the ideas come. That is the generation that advocates Nelson Chamisa.
So in short, after giving us a litany of wrongs, he is wrong. Thank you so much, Comrade Dosalos. You have actually exposed the intel. No, thank you so much. You have actually exposed the intellectual laziness on the part of the article that Mr. Ngwe released, which has brought so much debate in our body politic, in the streets of Twitter and Facebook. But we have, quite frankly, as you have said, that your movement is not a movement bereft of ideas.
Of course.
You are for a democratic developmental state anchored on the values of justice,
yes,
solidarity, and freedom. You have clearly indicated that which is in the Constitution of Zimbabwe, you are going to make the Constitution a living reality. Constitutionalism vis-a-vis constitutionality. I'm just summarizing your presentation. You told us, Comrade Dosalos, about the strong institutions, political and economic, that you intend to create so that we have a $100 billion economy, so that we have a genuine democratic developmental state that is consensus-driven, that is embedded within society, and that is autonomous from the influences of global capital and domestic capitalists. You also told us about the reformation of the tax code that you are proposing, that you are going to reform the tax policies of this country to ensure that the taxation system or the burden of taxation, according to Section 298 of the Zimbabwean Constitution, is shared fairly amongst all citizens. But more importantly, in subsection B or C of Section 298, that revenue raised from taxation should be used for the development of Zimbabwe, which leads to the issues around devolution, which leads to the issues around prudent management of our public finances. Comrade Dosalos, I would love to give you final parting shots before I wrap up the tete-a-tete. What are your parting shots to the people of Zimbabwe? Voter registration, youth engagement in civic affairs, youth vote, the importance of organizing, resisting, and defending. In 2 minutes, Comrade Dosalos.
Thank you very much. Fellow Zimbabweans, I thank you for listening to this program. We thank every young person for showing. The question that I will ask as I conclude, is your name on the voters' roll? Because the future of this country is on the ballot. The future of our own children is on the ballot. Let's register to vote. Let's make sure that Zimbabwean people across the entire cosmos come back home and vote. This is where our future is led by Advocate Nelson Chamisa. With love and solidarity, I thank you.
Thank you so much, Comrade Dosalos, for joining us on the show. As usual, we cross-pollinated ideas. Fellow Zimbabweans, fellow Africans, fellow world citizens, this has been an episode of the Tête after 3 or so months. So forgive us for making it so long. There are a lot of issues that we wanted to deliberate on. Why we are calling for a democratic developmental state, which makes sure that the state is at the center of economic management. Why we are dismissing neoliberalism as a policy or an ideological framework that works for the few instead of the many. But more importantly, we heard from the alternative deputy spokesperson that we should all go and register to vote. Fellow citizens, allow me to say thank you so much for joining us on the show. Please comment in the comment section. We are more pleased to have those who disagree with us to comment so that we continue to have robust and engaging debates. Long live King Bulelani Lobengula Kamziligazi. Thank you so much. Aluta continua. Dignidad comandante, eventualidad demoradas. Asante sana. Long live Wamba Dia Wamba. I thank you.